Hi guys, and welcome to this video on IB Food and Health Optional Units. In this video we will be looking at food consumption, and we will also be looking at how food consumption is distributed around the world and the implications of food consumption or lack of food consumption on people's health and well-being. The video will also go on to consider the nutritional transition and how in fact people that are obese can at the same time be malnourished or undernourished. Sometimes countries experience a problem called the triple burden of nutrition, which we'll look at towards the end of this video. Again, it's important that we realise the importance of good food consumption, and how good food consumption is related very strongly to economic growth. We've revisited several times the concept that access to good social services, food, education, and medicine are absolutely vital prerequisites if you're going to develop a successful economy. In this map, you can see food consumption as a percentage of average household income. Unsurprisingly, the higher income countries spend proportionately less on food as a percentage of their household income. You will see, particularly for sub-Saharan Africa, much of this data is missing. However, those countries that are in green are spending a proportionally higher percentage of their household income on food. This has important implications. If you're spending comparatively less as a percentage of your household income on food, you're better able to absorb any food price increases. Therefore, by definition, you are more food secure. If you look at this graph, you will see Nigeria, for example, spends the majority of their household income on food. This means that should food become less available and higher priced, your family's nutrition is going to be very, very vulnerable. It might actually be the case that even if food is available, you will not be able to afford it. This is likely to become an increasing challenge, and there are a number of reasons for this. First of all, there is global climate change, which at times which in many locations is putting added stress on food supply. There is also the increased globalization of food supply and demand. This means people, for example, in less economically developed countries, not only have to compete against each other for availability of food, but also have to compete against people in more economically developed countries that might be purchasing food imports. This presents the real possibility of hidden hunger. That is hunger that you cannot readily see. Another aspect to consider is the growth of the global middle class. As well as increasing the difference between rich and poor people, the growth of the global middle class often sees an increase in meat consumption or dairy products. These place extra demands on the food supply. It takes considerably more food to produce meat and dairy items than it does for vegetarian items. So in the case of a hamburger, you could feed one person with a hamburger, or you can make around approximately 30 vegetarian meals using the same amount of grain that is used to feed that cow. Therefore, you can see the growth of the middle classes does present a huge challenge and increased demand for certain crops that could be used also as animal feed. We've already talked about uneven income distribution. One of the problems with uneven income distribution is it means that those at the bottom remain food insecure, and even worse, at times this can be hidden hunger. In fact, disturbingly so, we're finding that hidden hunger is also a feature of many more economically developed countries. The queues for charity food and from supplied by the government and charities, even in countries like the United States of America, and the use of charity banks in the UK, is a disturbing trend. On top of that, we have an increased level of urbanisation. Now over 50% of the world's population lives in urban areas. Urban populations also can be more food insecure because they are unable to produce their own food. However, at this point, it is worth pointing out that even people living in rural areas that are actually primary producers themselves of food do not necessarily enjoy good food security. Because, as we've stated before, much of this food is not available to them because it is intended for export and sale on a commercial basis. So you cannot take it for granted that there is a tight relationship between the availability of food and people's ability to purchase it. In many cases, we've actually seen cases where food production has increased, but in the same local area, people's food security has decreased. So linking through to the Sustainable Development Goals, here we can see Target 2.3 and Target 2.1 as being particularly relevant to this section of work. Again, we come back to the idea that the importance of good nutrition as a basis for economic development. We have seen that the definition of malnutrition is the inability to get enough food and nutrition to lead an active lifestyle. Going back to the concept of food consumption and household income. So if you're living in a country where you spend a large amount of the majority of your family income on food, you're unable to absorb sudden increases in the price of food. So in this example, for example, we can see Burundi. Burundi has recently seen a high increase in the cost of maize, in this case 15%. If you're already spending 90 or 95% of your household income on food, you would find it extremely difficult to carry on purchasing the same amount of maize or the same quality of maize as these prices increase. Therefore, as a global community, we really need to be concerned about the proportion of a family income that is spent on food. Unsurprisingly, there is a pattern in food consumption. So of course we've already considered that when we're thinking about food consumption and nutrition, we should not only just be looking at calorie intake. However, calorie intake is one part of the picture. So again, you can see in this map, in this choropleth map, or sometimes referred to as a heat map, we can see a very distinctive pattern. There is the dominance of the Indian subcontinent and sub-Saharan Africa as having very low levels of calorie consumption. Western Europe, and specifically the North America, has very high levels of calorie consumption, and as we go on to see, this as well can have equally disastrous effects on people's health and obesity. We've said a number of times that the world does actually produce enough food for everybody to be able to have enough to eat. So it's even more concerning that we still live in a world where we have considerable malnutrition. So the inadequate consumption of food is associated with a number of diseases. There are several indicators of malnutrition. Malnutrition, as we've said before, can be too little or too much food. Malnutrition is a condition that results from eating a diet with one or more nutrients that are either not in enough supply or too much, so that this diet causes health problems to the individual. It may involve calories, protein, carbohydrates, fats, vitamins, or minerals. Often it is a combination of these. One of the diseases associated with malnutrition is pellagra. Pellagra is a disease caused by a lack of the vitamin niacin, or vitamin B3. Symptoms include inflamed skin, diarrhea, dementia, and sores in the mouth. Again, we come back to this idea that if a significant part of your population is suffering from this condition, they will not be economically active. Kwashiorkor is a life-threatening and debilitating form of malnutrition, and it's caused by a lack of protein in the diet. It is commonly seen in low and low-middle income regions facing famine. This condition is very easily treated with a change in diet, and those who are treated in enough time usually have a full recovery. Its prevention is very simple. It's just a balanced diet with enough carbohydrate, fat, and protein. In the 21st century, there is really no reason why anybody should suffer this complaint. Marasmus occurs up to about the age of 1. And it can be distinguished from Kwashiorkor in that Kwashiorkor is just a lack in protein, but there is adequate energy intake. Marasmus is an inadequate energy intake of all forms, including protein. This has been a particular concern because much of the progress made in the 1950s for food production simply focused on carbohydrate and calorie intake and didn't really focus enough on protein. As we said before, the picture is actually much more complex, and we do live in a world where a considerable number of people are suffering from obesity. In 2014, for example, the last reliable figures that we have, 1.9 billion adults 18 years or older were overweight. Of these, 600 million were obese. So 39% of adults aged 18 and over were overweight in 2014 and 13% obese. So most of the world's population live in countries where being overweight and obesity kills more people than being underweight. In addition, 41 million children under the age of 5 are underweight are overweight or obese. This is in stark contrast with stunted growth and wasting. Again, on this map that we can see the presence of stunted growth and wasting, and unsurprisingly we see the dominance of the Indian subcontinent and sub-Saharan Africa. What actually is quite shocking here is the United States does feature as a country that has stunted growth and wasting. This is despite the United States being the richest country in the world. Stunted growth, also known as stunting or nutritional stunting, is a reduced growth rate in human development. and its primary manifestation of malnutrition. In addition to stunted growth, you are at greater risk of recurrent infections such as diarrhea in early childhood and even before birth due to malnutrition, due to fetal development brought on by a malnourished mother, is a considerable concern. Of course, in any circumstances, malnutrition in children is totally unacceptable. It is more shocking that this should occur in more economically developed countries such as the United States of America. So the definition of stunting by the World Health Organization is measured by the height for age value. If it is less than 2 standard deviations from the WHO child growth standards, then that's classified as stunting. Again, we can really start to see these patterns again when we look at undernourishment. Undernourishment means that a person is not able to acquire enough food to meet the daily minimum dietary energy requirements for a period of more than a year. The FAO defines hunger as being synonymous with chronic undernourishment. Here again, unsurprisingly, we can see the dominance of sub-Saharan Africa and the Indian subcontinent. As we've mentioned before in this video, there is also undernourishment in high-income countries and countries with high economic growth. An increasing problem is a population that is actually overfed but at the same time undernourished. Globally, an estimated 41 million children are currently overweight. Many countries are now facing an overlapping or triple burden of malnutrition, undernutrition, and micronutrient deficiencies on the one hand, but also overweight and obesity on the other. This is known as the triple health burden of nutrition. Now, these problems do not lie at opposite ends of the spectrum from starvation and obesity. The situation is actually much more complex. In fact, undernutrition and overnutrition frequently coexist in the same country, community, and even within the same individual. Stunted children, for example, face a greater risk of becoming overweight as adults. So in this video, we've considered the main effects of malnutrition and undernutrition. We've also looked at the distribution of these problems around the world. The next video will go on to think a little bit in more detail about the nutritional transition that is occurring in many countries and the likely impacts this is going to have on people and their health. Again, it's important that we remind ourselves about the relationship between good nutrition and economic growth. Good nutrition as part of social services that people are entitled to are a precursor to economic development. If you don't have a healthy population that's properly fed, you're going to find economic growth very, very difficult. Hey guys, I hope you enjoyed this video and you've had an opportunity to have a look at those maps. We'll revisit these themes in the next lesson, and we'll, as always, be very interested to share with you, share your concerns, questions, comments and observations.